Denny Mecham, and I'm president of the board of directors of the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum. And on behalf of the board and our staff and our membership and our army of volunteers, thank you for being here. We're delighted to have this turnout, and welcome. And now I'll turn over the program to our mistress of ceremonies and our intrepid executive director, Angie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denny, and thank you to everyone who's attended. I have been the person behind all those emails you've received for invitations and reminders, and so I feel like I know every single one of you who's sitting in this room individually and intimately. So thank you for putting up with all my emails and for attending this event. This is the first big event since I've been director at the museum, so I'm really excited to have everyone here. Okay, so we do have a full lineup of speakers, as you might notice. We were trying to save the trees, so if you can share the programs, that'd be great. And I did tell Fanny that I would announce that if you didn't get your portrait with her before the program, she will be available at the end of the program, so you can get your portrait with her still. Okay, so today we are here to celebrate the making of our short documentary film about Fanny Allen Penniman called Frontier and Flowers. And we have a lot of special guests here who have helped create this film in various capacities, who know a lot more information than I do about Fanny, about the Allen family, about different aspects of Fanny's life, and what it means to us today. But first, I want to talk a little bit about how I found out about the project. I started as the director here in March 2022. And my board of directors was very kind in that they handed off things incrementally to me. And so I found out, I think in June, that John Allen was going to be showing up in 2 months to film our movie. And that's what I was told. That's all I was told. And I was like, our movie? We're making a movie. What's going on? Tell me more about this. And I was told, well, we're making a short documentary film about Ethan Allen. And that's what I was told. Now, I don't know, I know I'm the director of the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum, but my first thought was, don't we have enough films about Ethan Allen? Is there anyone else we can make a film about in 2 months' notice to change the plan? And because of COVID having disrupted a lot of the original plan, there was an opportunity to make a change. And so I said, well, who do we know enough about that we can, in 2 months' time, get together a new script, get together a new array of expert consultants, and tell a different story that hasn't been told yet. And I was lucky enough that a pamphlet called Fanny's Flowers had just been published, that one of our board members, who's a local historian and researcher named Glenn Fay, had published. It's about, we have it in the gift shop, it's about 15 pages long. And that's about as much as the history books had known about Fanny at this point. And I said, is 15 pages enough to make a movie? And John Allen said, let's do it. So we revamped the project with 2 months to do so. And then we realized in the post-production phase that there was a lot of stuff we actually didn't know and that we were constantly finding out more. And so John Allen was gracious enough to come back again last summer to do some last-minute reshooting so I could correct myself and add in a lot more stories that we were finding out. So that's what I kind of wanted to share with you before I move off of the stage. But this film, I think, I just want to end with the summary of what this film means, and I think what Fanny's story means. Because then I hope that our speakers today, I think you're going to hear it again and again, the importance of this story. So Fanny, Montresor, Brush, Buchanan, Allen, Penniman. It's a long name, I know. I see people shake their heads. Oh, by the way, this is I had a 3 sentences I was allowed to submit to the National Park Service to get her onto the 250 storytelling project. So this is the 3 sentences. Fanny, Montresor, Brush, Buchanan, Allen, Penniman navigated the turbulent nature of the American Revolution in Vermont against anti-loyalist and anti-Yorker sentiment, which included intimidation, violence, and the confiscation of lands, and a sexist and patriarchal legal system which did not allow her to defend her rights in court. That's the first sentence. Her story is also gripping, semicolon. Orphaned at a young age, Fanny's aunt and uncle migrated with Fanny to what later became Vermont in order to claim land purchased from the colony of New York, which pitted Fanny's family against the rising power of the Green Mountain Boys militia led by Ethan Allen, a man who would eventually become Fanny's second husband and later represent her right to that Vermont land in court. But before Fanny and Ethan met, she was a war refugee, she lost a fiancé to a river drowning, she mourned the loss of a child, and she was widowed by that war. Period. I'm on the last one here. Fanny went on to raise 7 children, including 2 trailblazing daughters, Fanny Margaret, the first Catholic nun in New England, and Adelia Penniman, Vermont's co-first recorded botanist, hyphen, well, what's it called when you do the double hyphen? Ellipses. See, we got an editor here. Fanny's daughter Adelia shares this title with her mother, Fanny. And so Fanny's story shows us how the Revolution was truly a civil war within communities, especially here on the frontier and borderlands between the British in Canada and the rebels in New England, and how women of her era created spaces of strength and autonomy in a society designed against them. That's Fanny's story. It was just the prompt to get them to say, okay, now write a longer essay. So I knew it needs an editor for the grammar going in. Okay, so that's why Fanny's story inspired me, and I hope her story inspires you. So we're going to go back to the beginning of her story right now, and I'm going to introduce to the stage the man who is the curator at Fort Ticonderoga. And they own the very portrait in many of your hands right now. And this is really the first thing we know about young Fanny. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Matthew Keagle.
Well, thank you so much, Angie, and thank you everyone for coming out. I'm really eager to see this. As Angie noted, we are the stewards of the portrait of Fanny. And it's actually, I was going back to some of our earliest records, it's one of the earliest acquisitions from the Fort Ticonderoga Museum, which may sound odd being in New York State that we would have such an iconic figure in Vermont's history and part of our collection. But of course, the state boundaries that developed at the end of the 18th century are these artificial creations of the very conflicts that she lived through. And Fort Ticonderoga's story is, of course, intimately connected with Ethan Allen's, with Vermont's, and we share a lot of common history. And so early on, the museum acquired this painting from a Penniman descendant and purchased it along with a portrait of Margaret Schoolcraft, who raised her as her mother. And they are remarkable portraits of a very young woman at the beginning of a kind of tumultuous life through twists and turns in multiple nations and empires over the late 18th century. And I think is an opportunity to dive into this history more, because there's actually a great deal we don't know about this portrait. We don't know the exact artist. For years it was attributed to John Singleton Copley, and if you've ever seen a John Singleton Copley, you would know that this is not it. Later it was attributed to John Vanderlyn, who was a 19th century American New York painter. So there's much work still to be done, as there's always are in these stories, into the lives and experiences of these people. But to have a portrait of oneself made, even at a young age like this, says something really powerful about this person and their place in life and what they were able to do, and really sets up the remarkable later life of Fanny and all of her last names. I hesitate to say them all because it eat up too much of my time. I will merely say, though, that I'm very happy to say that in addition to getting the portrait out there at places like the Ethan Allen Museum, Fort Ticonderoga, through the help of many of our donors across the country, as well as a conservation treatment grant from the Greater Hudson Heritage Network in New York, are putting Fanny's portrait into art conservation. It is right now at the Williamstown Art Conservation Center in Massachusetts, where she will be restored, conserved, and brought up to the best possible condition to display. And she will actually be on display next year as part of our Revolutionary Anthology exhibit on the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, in the context of the British American world in which the Revolution began, where at the time she was a British subject with a father who was not a presence in her life, but was a British officer who even surveyed Fort Ticonderoga in 1774 on the eve of the Revolution and identified its poor condition that the Green Mountain Boys exploited when they took it. All this to be said, Fanny will be on display, and we also just found out that the Champlain Valley National Heritage Partnership awarded us a grant to conserve Margaret, her mother figure's portrait as well, and she will appear in a later iteration of these exhibits. So we hope that you'll come and see us after you get this introduction to Fanny's life here at the Ethan Allen Homestead, and go back and forth between these institutions over the next few years. So thank you again.
Next on our program is somebody who actually wasn't able to make it. There was a last minute, I won't go into the details, but eye surgery that needed to happen. So we wish Jessie's husband a speedy recovery from his detached retina. So yeah, not a fun thing. But Jessie did send in a few, she sent in a few remarks, so I want to give some of the highlights in the remarks. I thought I would just read it, but reading it, it has to be in Jessie's voice, and it has a lot of first person. So I'm just going to give the highlights. But Jessie is the president at the Westminster Historical Society, and Westminster is located in southeast Vermont, and it's on the Connecticut River. But at the time, New York claimed it, like New York claimed all this land. It was part of New York's Cumberland County. And so it was a place where Fanny's father figure, this was her, we believe, aunt's husband, Crean Brush, brought the family right before the Revolutionary War happened. Now, according to Jessie's notes here, she believes that Fanny was in Westminster during the Westminster Massacre. There's a really good chance of that, she says. And that the house that Fanny lived in was very close to the courthouse where the massacre occurred. If you don't know a lot about the massacre, in short, it was a Yorker, Green Mountain Boys, rich, poor, patriot, loyalist. The lines were blurry, but it was a shootout that happened 1 month before the Revolutionary War started down in Massachusetts. And 2 men were killed, and as a result, there was a lot of tension, you can imagine, between the Yorkers and the Vermont loyalists, or the Vermont independence movement, you can say. So Fanny and Margaret fled Westminster as war refugees. They went down to New York City. But after the war, Fanny did move back to Westminster, and it was there that she met Ethan Allen, who was to become her next husband. They got married in Westminster, and you can still view some of these sites that Fanny lived in, or at least you can go to the site of, and there'll be a historic marker that says, this is where, it doesn't say this is where Fanny got married, because again, a lot of times women are erased from the history books. It'll say like, this is where Stephen Bradley, is that his name, had his house. That's right, thank you, I got the main Vermont historian here. Okay, you can correct me. This is where Stephen Bradley had his house, and then what it doesn't say is, this is where Fanny was renting a room because her land that she inherited was confiscated by the Republic of Vermont, and so she was penniless and sitting there and saying, what am I going to do next? And then Ethan Allen showed up on the scene. So, but the marker says this is where Stephen Bradley's house is. But now you'll know more when you see that marker. I also want to put in from Jessie's remarks here that you can learn more about Westminster from some of the books that Jessie has written, including Revolutionary Westminster and Westminster, Vermont from 1735 to 2000. There's also a website for the Westminster Vermont Historical Society, which you should definitely visit, and you should actually visit the museum there in person. They have an exhibit right now about the Westminster Massacre called Oh Horrid Scene. And then she also made a note here I want to make sure to share you. In 2027, the Westminster Historical Society will be making the case that Westminster and not Windsor was actually the birthplace of Vermont. So stay tuned. So those are the highlights of the remarks from Jessie. Okay, I would like to now welcome to the stage Our, on the program he's listed as the head gardener, but he has many hats here. Tom is also the museum manager. He runs the front desk. He coordinates our volunteers. He helped me move all the furniture for this event. But in this context, he is the man carrying on Fanny's legacy right here. That responsibility is on his shoulders. He's our head gardener for Fanny's garden here. Please welcome Tom to the stage.
Okay. Welcome. I have a minute. When I give a tour of the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum, at some point I usually say, Ethan Allen's all right. He was a hero. He seized Fort Ticonderoga from the British during the American Revolution, but Fanny's my hero, and I'm on Fanny's side and everything, because Fanny is Vermont's first botanist, and I'm the gardener at the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum. And it is my honor to grow plants in Fanny's garden that Fanny was familiar with, because they were in her herbarium that they still have at the University of Vermont, the collection of 90 species of plants that were mounted on paper and labeled by Fanny and her daughter Adelia. And I've listed 15 plants that grow in Fanny's garden today that are in the 200-year-old collection of plant cuttings. Rhubarb, elderberry, garden sorrel, garden phlox, daylily, red clover. Oh, what is that? Barren strawberry, spiderwort, Solomon seal, flowering raspberry, sage, foxglove, beans, black locust trees. Ugh. Don't get me started on the black locust trees. And lily of the valley. And it's an honor to grow these plants in Fanny's honor.
So Tom has, more than hinted at Fanny's botany, her botany experience. And so we have a botany expert here to tell us a little bit more about Fanny's work with plants. So please welcome Dr. David Barrington.
Oh, Tom, you set me up so well. I don't have to talk. Thank you very much. I'll sit down. About 120 years ago, Fanny's great-granddaughter was getting on, and she didn't know what to do with this pile of paper with plants fitted into little slits that that somebody had cut into the paper. And so she said, what do I do with this pile of plants that my great-grandmother and my grandmother put together? And somebody said, well, you know, there's this place up at the university called the Pringle Herbarium. They have thousands of those things. And so they showed up at the Pringle Herbarium and left us the Fanny Allen and Adelia Allen Herbarium. And this is what Tom's talking about. And we still have it. It's absolutely fascinating. If you come and visit the university, I'll give you some time to look at it yourself. It's really fun. The interesting thing about the collection is that Adelia did a better job than her mother. I'm not quite sure why that is. It may be what survived and what didn't, so I may be misrepresenting the two women. But we do have, in fact, about 60 specimens mounted in that strange way where they made little slits in paper to hold, no glue at all, just to hold the plants in place. Now, this is 1813, according to everything we have. It was right in the teens they were doing this with Fanny and her then daughter at home. And I want to say just a little bit about the collection and its place in Vermont botany. It's important to understand that there is no evidence of any other botanical activity of anywhere near the quality that these collections showed at that time. What I mean is all the plants were identified with Latin species and genus names. They were all indicated as to what class and order they belonged in the then classification system in progress, the Linnaean system, and there was a common name for each one written in. So it takes a level of sophistication and a real training to have that understanding of the flora and to name the plants, and they're named quite well. So in terms of how they match with modern names, largely well done. One of the most fascinating things about the collection is, Tom, indeed, there are a number of garden plants there. About half of the plants are either garden plants or plants that you would expect as roadside weeds. Interestingly, the other half are native Vermont plants. And amongst those are a few plants that give us a sense that she and her daughter didn't spend all their time in the garden. For instance, there's pitcher plant in the collection. There's Arethusa, the orchid, and there's bog laurel. They are in the bog. Perhaps the Colchester bog nearby, that's the nearest one. To look at the bog flora. There was harebell, which is a common and beautiful one of the campanulas that you see in the niches in the rocks along the lakeshore at Lake Champlain and along our rivers. There was snowberry, and I'm going to slip my mind on this one. There's one other, well, there's two plants from the northern white cedar barrens along the lakeshore. They grow on the bluffs right along the lakeshore, so they would walk along those bluffs. So you get an idea that they got out and around, at least here in the county, to look at the natural world. So it gives you a fascinating idea of what's going on. There's much left to be known about the collection, but it's wonderful to be able to see how that collection fits into the context of everything that everybody else who's contributed to this video has brought to the fore, and bring, you know, a sense of how the collection and its collectors to life, and I'm sure you'll appreciate as well. There's some interesting things left to be done. I want to know more about the naming of these plants, because some of the old Latin names are very interesting. And how the heck did she get? What resources was Fanny using? Where is the education that led her to have that sophistication level when there's no evidence of a community like the university in place at that time that had botanical expertise? So those are the questions that are left to me for the future.
I feel like when we made this film, it left me with more questions than information. And that's in part because we chose a subject that there are not a lot of surviving primary source material about. And if anyone here has researched anyone in the late 18th century or early 19th century who was not, your subject was not white and male, you know what I'm talking about. You're not going to show up to an archive and find letters and diaries written by that person. So you have now heard from the two main sources we have. The portrait and her herbarium is the only handwriting we have of Fanny that we know of. So when you're given a subject like that, you have to research the context in which they lived to give more information to flesh out their story. And so we have two people in our audience who've been doing just that, researching the context in which Fanny lived, and can really maybe tell us a little bit more about what researching this era in history can teach us about Fanny and teach us about today, and why is this an important time period for Americans to learn about today. So please welcome to the stage Melinda and Rick Moulton.
Hi, I'm Melinda Moulton. I'm the executive producer of Rick Moulton Productions. About a year ago, Glenn Fay invited me to come out to meet the new executive director. And I came out and I saw the exhibit, got a tour, and I was looking at the exhibit. I said, where's the media on Ethan Allen? And I was told that there was never a documentary made on Ethan Allen, a full-fledged documentary. And so I turned to them and I said, well, we were going to do a project. We were in the middle of planning another film, and I turned to my husband and I said, well, guess what we're going to do? There's a 250th is coming up. So we have just embarked on a project to do a PBS documentary, full length, on Ethan Allen. But I want to let you know that it was Angie Grove, and Glenn Fay, who sent us the narration and helped us work out the outline. And without them as our muses and our go-to, this film would never be getting made. And Stephen Perkis from the Vermont Historical Society is our fiscal sponsor. And I'm going to turn it over to my husband, but I want to thank you for all your support in making this film, because there never has been a documentary made about full-length documentary on Ethan Allen. So we're looking forward to doing that.
Well, we're looking forward to it and working, part-time at it. And I would say that the Vermont Historical Society is not our fiscal sponsor, our fiscal agent. And we're working together to make this film happen, but it's Melinda who's made the financial reality possible to make the film. And thank you, dear.
You're welcome.
And we have 25 historians that we're in touch with. We'll have a number, probably around 18 people presented in the film who will be giving us testimonials. And that's one way to depict the 17th century or the 18th century, because you have no actual photographs and you have no films. And in the case of Ethan Allen, we don't know what he really looked like. So AI may help us if we can get enough descriptions of what he looked like. But it's really a fun project, but on the other hand, it's a really serious and important one. And I'd like to just point out that we have 4 of the historians here in the room. We have Keagle. We're at Fort Ticonderoga today. Thank you for your time. And love to see an Ethan Allen letter to George Washington, and it jumps off the page at you. And Angie, certainly, and Glenn, and Elise Guyette will also be in the film, and I worked with her recently on a short film for Rugby. And after that, I've talked too much. And about 2 years from now, in the summer, you'll see the film here.
Melinda. So this film could not have happened, like you pointed out, there's people in this room who are working with your film. There's a lot of people in this room who helped us make this film. And we had some very generous support from Vermont Humanities. So I'd like to invite up Elizabeth Malone from Vermont Humanities to speak a little bit as well.
Hi everyone, just a quick synopsis of who we are at Vermont Humanities. We're the state branch of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And these are the greatest days that we get to celebrate with organizations that we support. We have funding both through the federal government, but also the state government, and private dollars is what makes our grant making possible. So immense thanks to the people of Vermont and the many donors that we have that support great projects like this. We provide grants of many different sizes, from $1,000 up to much bigger, and encourage everyone, if you have an organization or a project in mind, particularly that finds those unheard voices from history and from today, then we would be happy to talk with you more about our grant program. And as someone who loves the trails and the homes at the Homestead here, I'm very excited to be learning a little bit more about how I've been walking in Fanny's footsteps.
Thank you, and thank you to Vermont Humanities for their support of this project. We also have a special guest today who I've pointed out a few times how Fanny's story it's been a struggle to find her story in history because she was a woman and her story was not recorded, her voice was not respected. And we still have issues we're working on today, right? So a lot has happened, a lot has come for women's rights, for equal rights, but Fanny represents to us how there's still more to do. So with that, please welcome Emily O'Hara.
Thank you so much for lifting up Fanny's story. I had the pleasure of getting x-rays earlier this week at Fanny Allen, and also got to learn a bit more about the other Fanny. And I just want to say that what you just said was so on point. People like Fanny and her story they weren't represented, and so it's so important to have that representation now. And young girls, women, all genders in school today can learn about her or learn about the field of botany or just the ways that they can contribute. And at this point in the movement, essentially, for women's rights and feminism together, I don't have to tell any of you in this room, are experiencing a period of backlash. So all of those gains that were made, built on the legacy of rebellious good trouble stirred up by people like Fanny, are just kind of at a standstill in some ways, and we not only have to continue watering the seeds that were planted, but we have to plant new seeds. And so what we're focused on right now is the Commission on Women. I should have started with that. That's where I work.
I should have started with
No,
that. My apologies.
Right. I work at Vermont Commission on Women, or VCW. It's a nonpartisan state agency within the state of Vermont. And we have commissioners planted, well, that's not a great word, but they are recruited and then representing different counties around the state. But they do plant seeds in their communities and just grow the potential of young girls and all different genders. Right now we're focused on equal pay, so of course representation matters, and having a first like Fanny is very important. But once we get that first and once they are in a space, how do we support them, right? How do we create access that didn't necessarily have to be there for folks before them? And I will leave it at that because I only have 2 minutes, but if you'd like to learn more, we are currently recruiting for new commissioners, and we're looking for women, girls, men, all genders to help at the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. In addition to the Vermont Commission on Women, we also have an amazing senator who has been doing a lot of work for women's rights. So please welcome to the stage the State Director of the Office of Senator Peter Welch, Rebecca Ellis.
Good evening. It's nice to see everyone. I'm actually here with my sister Deb. We grew up actually only about half a mile from here, so it's really fun to be here this evening and participate in this event. So I'm the State Director for Senator Peter Welch, and I have 1 minute. As we know, in the 18th century, women did not have the right to hold property. They did not have the right to sign contracts. They did not have the right to vote. They did not have the opportunity to go to college or higher education. They did not have the opportunity to be in many professions or occupations. And so the world has changed a lot. Women now have all of those rights. And for the last 50 years, women also had the right to reproductive freedom and the right to abortion, which after the Dobbs decision in 2022, that is no longer a constitutional right. So Senator Welch has been very active and a champion of women's rights, especially to protect women's right to reproductive freedoms. There are 2 bills in the Senate right now, the Women's Health Protection Act of 2023 that he co-sponsored, the Reproductive Freedom for Women Act of 2024, which he co-sponsored, and while all of the Democrats and independents in the US Senate support those bills, they don't have 60 votes, which are necessary to defeat a filibuster. So those rights remain at the state level. I also wanted to mention that Senator Welch has been working hard on Supreme Court reform. That's another place where women's rights are being threatened. So he's been supporting term limits. He's also been supporting ethical rules for the Supreme Court. We probably have one of the worst courts, if not the worst courts, that the United States has ever had. And then a third thing that happened recently that advances women's progress is Senator Welch asked and called for the president to withdraw from the presidential race, which was a really hard decision. Vermont is the state that has supported the president by proportion more than any other state in the country, and I think he's really well loved and well respected, and especially by Senator Welch. When President Biden decided to withdraw, that opened the room for perhaps the next or the first woman president of the United States. So that's another way that hopefully women will be moving forward. So in addition to my 1 minute that I was given, I also wanted just to mention, in addition to legal rights, how cultural values really shape women's roles and how people perceive women and how they perceive their actions and their attitudes. because that's so important even today. It was important in the 18th century, but it's even today. And for an example, I was thinking in the 1990s when Fanny Allen Hospital and Mary Fletcher Hospital merged, and I think as everyone knows, that became Fletcher Allen, you know, two men's names instead of Mary Fanny. And, and you know, it is funny, and the first thing I think is like, wow, that's, you know, they were so unfair, they didn't give it two women's names. But then also I thought, why do I even think that's funny? Why do I even think that Mary Fanny is a funny name? You know, and it's like we have these deeply embedded values about women's role and women's place. So I look forward to watching the movie and seeing how Fanny saw her life in the 18th century and how she might have seen our life now, too. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rebecca. So one of the ways in which we today can help promote women's stories in history is by researching them, writing books about them, having programs like this. And so I would like to invite up someone who is spearheading some of those projects. Please welcome the Executive Director of the Vermont Historical Society, Steve Perkins.
Thanks, Angie, and I was given 2 minutes, so I'll cede one of them back to Rebecca. But really want to be here tonight to congratulate Ethan Allen Homestead and John on this film, and I really look forward to seeing that. Angie said, talk a little bit about Vermont Historical Society. We've been around for a long, long time, but for the last 10 years, one of our guiding principles has been to tell Vermont's story. And that's a very simple statement, but it's a very complex thing to do. And it doesn't mean through one viewpoint or two viewpoints, it's through multiple viewpoints. And we believe very strongly that that can happen through many different platforms, many different people, and many different voices. And so we were happy to work with the Vermont Commission on Women on the, it's a horrible name, Vermont Women's Database, but it's really like the Vermont Women's Hall of Fame, and you can check that out on our website. And we're adding, 6 or 7, Elise helped out with this, women to that program later this fall, and through our publishing programs, as well as our exhibits and our speakers programs. So Vermont's for everybody. And I think of a sticker that my daughter put on the back of my truck out there, who's wiser than her years, but I think you've all seen it, that it's not pie. We could say history's not pie. So by we're not dividing it up. You're not getting less because we're talking about this person. It only increases our knowledge of the world around us. We're telling Vermont's story. So I'm excited to be here tonight. Thank you.
So I hope the speakers up to now have convinced you that Fanny's important and her story's important, and I hope it's gotten you excited to see this film. So I want to rein us back in just a little bit for our last 2 speakers to speak directly about the making of this film. And so I'm actually going to introduce the next person, but then the next person is going to introduce our VIP of the night. So I would like to please have you all welcome. He's been the project lead for this film. He's been a longtime board member. He's held a lot of officer positions on our board. Docent, tour guide. He's
old, yes.
He's well experienced. Please welcome John Offenbach.
So I'm up here to very briefly introduce our director, John Allen. And you hear this name, John Allen, and you have to wonder, is this an authentic Allen? And the answer is yes. He is descended from the Allens of Litchfield, Connecticut, as is Ethan. Both came up from Litchfield. John's people landed in Chelsea, Vermont. How many years there, John?
How many years have I lived
In
there?
Chelsea, yeah, well, the family's been there a number of years, correct?
Right, yeah.
So anyway, how did we land this authentic Allen with a number of credits, videographic credits to his name, here at our little place, the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum? It happened through my brother, Thomas Achenbach, who just passed away a year ago. My brother Thomas Achenbach had a very good boyhood friend in Wethersfield, Connecticut, the oldest town in the state, founded in 1632, Ronald Abbey. Ronald Abbey attended Dartmouth College. His roommate for 4 years at Dartmouth College was John Allen. John Allen, within the last 10 or 15 years, has been telling his old roommate, Ron Abbey, down in Connecticut, that he'd like to do something videographically about Ethan Allen. Ron Abbey knew about this connection to his old friend Tom, my brother, and me here at the Homestead. That way we found out about John Allen's interest, we got a hold of him, and the rest, as they say, is history. John Allen.
Somehow related to Ethan Allen, raised in Chelsea, Vermont, went to school there at Chelsea High School. I was always told by my family and the history books that when Ethan Allen captured your fort, he stood in the posture we see out there in the statue, right? And says, "I demand you surrender this fort in the name of the great Jehovah of the Continental Congress." I thought I was proud of that. Yeah, I mean, my family and I visited the fort quite a few times. Great place. A couple of years ago, I went back there with my grandchildren, and one of your guides said, "No, that's baloney. That's not what he said. What he really said was, 'Get the hell out of there, you goddamn dirty rats!'" So it shows how much we really know about people in history. I like the latter better, I think. He had a few totes for that anyway. As a filmmaker, and you know this very well, Rick, we tell stories, we all tell stories. Right? Everybody loves a story. You love to tell a story, you sit around the bridge table or the poker table or just the barber shop or the beauty parlor and you tell stories. You like to listen to stories and tell stories. Some of us who grow up make a profession out of that. Some people become historians, and historians find a way to use words in wonderful ways that takes us back into history, makes us feel history, makes us part of history. Not just the stories, but the consequences of the stories, the causes of the stories. But when you become a documentary filmmaker, as Rick I know has struggled at, you don't only use words to tell a story. You have to find pictures. You have to find resources. You have to, dig into the sources of this. Now, how many, you've already heard this, how many letters do you think Fanny Allen wrote in her own handwriting about her life growing up? Zip. How many journals did she do? Zip. How many portraits are there? Now, we're talking about visuals, right? You're making a film, you gotta have visuals. One, right? One picture that you guys are holding in your hands, and that was it. So what is the story of Fanny Allen? We have nothing from her personally. We have a lot of hearsay stories. We have stories that were told from the memory of a child who thought he remembered seeing Ethan Allen propose to her, but he told it, many years later. Is that true? How do we represent that? How do we tell that story? We have the one portrait, but when you start to think about her, even that name, Frances Montresor Buchanan, Allen Penniman, that alone holds a lot of stories in it. What's going on with all these names? And so we start with that, and when Angie came to us and said, okay, we're going to do this, we had already, my wife and I spent 2 years researching Ethan Allen, digging into all the pictures and photos that might be available of him, not photos, but paintings and drawings and sketches.
I'm really glad they didn't tell me that before I proposed to change it.
So she said, and she's holding the cash, right? So she said, we're going to do this. We need to do this about it. So I okay. So we started over from scratch. We went into this hole where there was one painting made by somebody who we don't even know. And then we discovered, yes, there are these plants that we have that have her writing on it, but that doesn't tell you too much. So we had to do a lot of digging, and we had a great deal of help from Angie, from Glenn Fay, from Jessie Haas, and many people who are here, Tom Sharpley, our Fanny of the day here. And we all started digging and finding out what we could find out. And what we came up with was a sense of the world that she came through. When we interviewed some people, I mean, you can't just base a movie on interviews. Otherwise, you might as well be writing a book. If all you've got are people sitting there talking at you, you could put it in print and save people all the time. So we had to find ways to visualize it. We found that the best way to do that really was to replicate visually the world that Fanny passed through, the world of the Tory household in New York, of the previous husband, of what was going on in Westminster, all those things. So in a way, this is not only the story of Fanny Allen, it is the story, the larger story of the times of, and really of women, what the role of women was back then, and how she fit into that. So I won't keep going on and on, but enjoy the fact that we had some wonderful historians who did talk about Fanny and the times she lived through, but also her role as a woman and how she related and how that represents the role of women at that time, and by extraction, maybe even today. So, thank you.